call on another senior advocate, Fabian Ajogwu, to present his paper.
My Lord, the Honorable Justice Faji, Chairman, Bennett Senior Advocates, members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen. Mine will be to sort of like put a linkage between the discussions that we've held. So let me go on a little story. July 2011, we were all at the British Airways Lounge, destination London. And what were we going to do? Arbitration. The parties to this arbitration is an IOC with its offices in Victoria and Lagos, an oil service company in Lekki, Lagos. Witnesses were the respective employees of the claimant and the respondent. The arbitration was to be conducted under the London Court of International Arbitration. And so they appointed our own Professor, Fabian Ajogwu, QCSAN, asked the arbitrator. His offices at the time was Festival Road, Victoria Island, Lagos. But we were all headed to London to conduct this arbitration of a home-generated dispute by home parties. And when we're done, we'll come and cross this lagoon and go to Federal High Court and seek to enforce it. I try to illustrate sometimes the inexplicable ways that we ship out arbitration out of Nigeria under many different guises. And I wondered if an alien was looking at us from above, whether this alien wouldn't question the rationality of these people in the way they do things. And so I'm a firm believer of domesticating as much as possible arbitration, especially in the maritime sector, whilst respecting, of course, the autonomy of parties. I have 15 minutes and perhaps now 13 to talk about the intricacies of ship finance and acquisition. Now, this is a subsector of this industry where a whole lot happens and it's quiet, and I can tell you that it's largely driven by the oil and gas activities. So you've got a range of petroleum vessels, you've got logistics vessels, and I was privileged to be involved with the first wholly owned deep offshore logistics vessel, wholly Nigerian owned, that was supporting the Shell Bunga project. And it was an eye-opener, and this is now about perhaps 11 years ago. It was an eye-opener in the sense that this is a very niche market where you see transactions that are in the figures ranging at the time about $19 million up to, you would typically get 32,000 deadweight tonnage vessels, then doing $18 million. Today, those vessels are going for about $22 million, upwards range of even $80 million in purchase, in pricing, and even a second-hand such vessels will be $50 million. So it then tells me something. Why do we talk about maritime transactions here if we do not focus at this vessel? If you don't own vessels, the owners of these vessels will determine what really happens and how our industry is shaped. And so it leads me then to the question of how these vessels are acquired. Three main ways. You could have a lot of equity to go and buy a vessel, but a friend and an old client, David Ross, was the MD CEO of a company called Hydrodive. They were a deep offshore support oil service company. Said something to me I've never forgotten. He said, a boat, as in a vessel, is a lovely encounter, but she will never leave you the same. She will either make you or kill you, but will never leave you from where you started. So for those who are not accustomed to the field, if you go into vessel services support in that industry, and I'm particular about oil and gas sector because that's where, in my own experience, it's the highest need, not really cargo, highest need for those kinds of vessels. So you've got the logistics support vessel, the day vessels that just supply them food and stuff, the security vessels that go around a certain radius of their operations to make sure things are fine. Reason because our Navy and all the other agencies do not have sufficient vessels to support the operations that these oil companies need. When you look at it then, it would tell you that going into it equity alone, you would rarely find Nigerians or companies here that can go into this kind of transactions alone. So they will need debt financing or at best a hybrid of both. Now, experience in this sector tell me that the most you get from Nigerian players will typically be the 20/80 equity to debt financing mix. So that leaves a huge gap of opportunity for third-party financiers before I talk about Nigerian banks. But the opportunities are not taken by the Nigerian banks as much as possible. And the reason is this. Nigerian banks are accustomed to having short-term funds. And vessel financing require 5 to 10 years, 5 years for second hand, 7 years minimum if it's a brand new vessel. And we find that this isn't happening. Now for those and the few that happen, a few mechanisms need to be in place. They need to then tie back to the project for which those vessels are needed, and which is the project financing aspect. Typically, this is the model, and just to keep it, like the chairman said, this is typically what we should talk about the whole day, and it's actually the subject of the book that I've just written, which is essentially debriefing those different transactional experience into a book. If you look at it, one thing that comes across is because they're not able to finance it in full, you would then have to recourse to what is called a true sale. You would look for an oil company, for instance, that says, I have this need, and I have an 8-month need of a vessel this size, and this is a daily rate. Some of them are $5,000 a day, $7,000 a day, $12,000 a day, 20, depending on what that vessel does and how badly they need it for a specific operation. They're happy to pay mobilization and demob at the end of the transactions, at the end of the services that you offer them. So this forms the basis of going to, and foreign banks do provide those financing. The minute you have the secured streams of cash flow from the leaders of your service, they would then, based on a letter from, say, Shell, in the case of the Bonga project, would simply just provide you the financing. They may have a local participating bank, and a few of them in the initial stages, there's a dearth of experience amongst Nigerian banks, because they still have the mentality of asking you for a COO. And you're looking for a COO in a transaction, I don't know, you need a high-rise in Ikoyi, or maybe one of those where the contents exceed the value of the building, to be able to secure those kinds of transactions. So the securities they needed were grossly inadequate to the size of funding needed for those transactions. So they had to be true sales. And the true sale concept would derive from the backup letters from the users of the service. So you have a whole lot of those oil IOCs will issue such letters. And of course, without liability, because all they want to guarantee is that they will use the vessel when provided and when the vessel meets the specifications that are set out. Anytime I look at it, it reminds me of the story told in my holy book about the servant who, just that I want to modify the story, he found his piece of talents They were four-lettered piece of talents. And I'll tell you the four letters. But in this case, he didn't dig a hole to put his talent. He just put it in a glass boxed account and staring at it. The four letters are CVFF, Cabotage Vessel Financing Fund. Approximately now maybe $258 million or 77 billion naira, I may be wrong. But I think the time has come to optimize what has happened, what has been built. It was a unique idea, and I commend the prudence of the master to have grown the fund to date. But I think the time has come to begin to profile this as counterpart lending, not to lend in whole. The model that I've been reading about will typically finance 5-6 vessels, and that's it. Everybody will say bye-bye. And it's not sustainable. The more sustainable way would be to provide them as guarantees or counterpart funding for other banks to participate in a consortium of lenders who would then take the mortgage of the vessel. So when we talk about ship finance and acquisition, you're looking at a complex set of transactions that would encompass some loan agreements, declarations of mortgage, waivers, certain waivers that are needed to do those transactions, accompanying terms, and of course the established Norwegian sales form or Nippon forms. Now all of those templates, for instance, are mentioned in my book. They're actually too long to discuss in this short time that I have. Now, it brings out another opportunity, which nothing says it can't happen here. The new or emerging role of the shipbroker in today's world. It has radically changed from what it used to be before, of an exclusive club, to people who have ideas about the old ideas about, knowledge of world values and tonnage, but then particularly about bank procedure, credit facilities, understanding the legal, contractual requirements, together with an appreciation of the technical issues relating to the need for those vessels as well as the users of those vessels. So it is no longer just they come and bid for a vessel and get it. It's now more about the intricacies behind getting those vessels in field. Just like many would say, the movies you and I watch, let's say on Hollywood, are actually heavy Wall Street financed projects. So you would typically look at any of those movies your children watch of Avengers, and you see those things do $1 billion in sales. So the kinds of people who finance those transactions would be JP Morgan type people. The point I'm making is that in today's world, it is not just the vessel and the typical marine operations. The complicated activities that happen behind to put those vessels in water create a whole new set of industry, deal opportunities, fee earning opportunities for practitioners, and so on. And I can tell you quietly that it is quietly lucrative, and people wouldn't really know what's going on. It's a very closed niche, as I said. Now that I've talked about the sources, but then when I talk about the actual transaction, the key thing to understand in it, as I said, is to be able to certify that you have a true sale. Because once you have a true sale, then there is an opportunity that can be sustained, the risk minimized, because it used to be that you got a vessel and started looking for who needed the vessel. In prudence today, in intricate ship acquisition transactions, you found a needer of vessel X that you don't have, and you went to get vessel X for this person, financed by a third party, of course, with the registration and mortgage and all of the securitization in place. I find that